Well, many years ago, my great mentor, Monsignor Robert Sokolowski, told a class of eager philosophy students that we should read Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics every year of our lives. He felt that as you grew older, insights would just keep emerging from that book. Well, I can't say I followed him exactly, but I have returned a lot to that text over the years, and indeed, it has continued to open up to me in wonderful ways. One of Aristotle's great insights in that book is that we learn the virtuous life by watching the virtuous person in action. So it's not so much an abstract exercise for Aristotle. I can't like deduce the moral life from principles. Rather, you watch the virtuous person in action the way an apprentice would watch his master paint, or the way an understudy would watch a great actor work. That's how you learn the moral life, by imitation. Well, all this came to mind when I watched Steven Spielberg's most recent movie, The Bridge of Spies. Spielberg, who has emerged, I think, in recent years as a latter-day Frank Capra, sort of a celebrator of basic American values and the courage required to defend them. The movie stars Tom Hanks, who is appropriately the Jimmy Stewart of our time. So he plays the role that Jimmy Stewart played in a lot of Frank Capra movies. Well, in this film, Tom Hanks plays James Donovan, who's a New York attorney who's been pressed into service to defend Rudolph Abel. Rudolph Abel is a man very credibly accused of spying for the Soviet Union at the height of the Cold War. So he's like a hyper unpopular figure. And Donovan's pressed into service to provide him a fair trial. He does it not because he's convinced that Abel is innocent. In fact, he's pretty convinced that he's guilty. But he also is convinced that in a free society, everyone deserves a fair trial. And so out of that sense of moral obligation, he decides to defend him. Now in this, he exemplifies the most fundamental of the cardinal virtues, namely justice. What does justice look like? Well, it looks like that move. See, Plato said that to be just is to render to each his due. Aquinas refines that as the constant will to render the right to someone. So what is someone owed? When you do that in a consistent way, you become a person of justice. And so Donovan, in defending Abel, exemplifies this great fundamental virtue. One thing I like about that is it's bracingly objective. So we live in a time when the moral life is construed in largely subjectivist terms. To be morally upright is to express yourself and defend your own rights. Well, no, says Plato in the great tradition, that justice is bracingly objective. It's rendering to another what is due. Okay. The second great cardinal virtue follows from that, because justice will remain an abstraction unless you know how to apply it in the particular and concrete situation. You know how to bring it to bear here and now. That's called the virtue of prudence. I've compared it before to a quarterback reading a defense. I mean, so he knows in the present situation, given all the shifting demands of the play, how to act, where to throw the ball, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a kind of practical moral know-how. That's prudence. Now, James Donovan in the film has this in spades. So in the courtroom, he uses all of his knowledge of the law, his extensive knowledge of American law, to bring to bear rendering to this man what is due to him. But more to it, I found even more interesting, in the chambers of the judge is portrayed as a somewhat corrupt figure who does not believe this principle of every man deserves a fair trial. And Donovan uses his considerable knowledge of human nature to kind of finesse the judge and to achieve justice. So he exemplifies the virtue of prudence. It's very interesting that prudence has kind of a fussy overtone for us. Someone's prudent, I mean they're kind of Victorian or they're hung up. That's not it at all. It's a very practical moral know-how. And without it, we can't truly be just. You could talk a good game about justice, but without prudence, you can't really be just. The third cardinal virtue now follows. Because justice can be threatened from the inside and from the outside. It can be threatened from the inside when our own lack of integration compromises our ability to do the right thing. So, for example, someone who's in the grip of an addiction, let's say to alcohol, and knows that, look, to do his job and to be upright to his family, he's got to stop drinking, and yet he drinks. Or someone who says, look, the last thing I want to do if I want to preserve my marriage, to do the right thing by my wife, is the last thing I need to do is commit adultery. But yet his sexual desires are so disordered that he commits adultery. That's when justice is threatened from the inside. What's required is the virtue of temperance. And again, that has a fussy Victorian overtone, unfortunately. Think of, temperance societies and some little fussy Victorian granny, But that isn't it at all. It means that you get your interior life so ordered that you can do the works of justice. In fact, you can direct your inner passions toward justice. Well, we see it in the movie because Donovan goes to Berlin to effect a prisoner exchange. And he's being harassed in all sorts of ways. And he's in the most uncomfortable environment, in the cold of the hotel room with bad food, bad accommodations. He's being threatened by arrest at every turn. Well, someone who is intemperate would say, no, I need comfort. I need good food. But Donovan hangs in there. He controls his passions, and he does the right thing. Lastly, of course, justice can be threatened by exterior menaces. So the soldier who knows that standing his ground and defending his country is the right thing to do, but his fear of injury and death causes him to run. So that would be the lack of courage. What's required is this virtue of fortitude or courage so you can withstand external threats to justice. Well, do we see it in Donovan? Yes, very clearly. Very early on in the film, he's actually threatened directly by a CIA agent who's very suspicious of this man who's defending a Soviet spy. And he threatens him very directly. It threatens his career, threatens his well-being. And then, even more dramatically, as the trial's unfolding, someone comes by and shoots up his house, shoots bullets into his house, threatening his kids. Well, it's the most dramatic threat to his life. And Donovan withstands it and does the right thing. So justice, prudence, temperance, courage, you can see them in this just man, in this righteous man. You can see them on display. At a certain point in the movie, Abel, who's been defended, even though he ends up being convicted, but he admires the man who defended him. And he kind of mutters this phrase in Russian, and Donovan says, what does that mean? And he said, it means the standing man. And that becomes sort of the leitmotif of the movie, that Donovan is the standing man. He stands his ground when he has to. And that's a good characterization, I think, of the righteous man, of the upright man. He stands firm. And I think if you want to understand the virtuous life, I'd follow Sokolowski's advice. I mean, pick up Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics. And if you can, read it every year of your life. But if you're a little pressed for time, I think you do a lot worse than to watch Spielberg's latest movie.